On this episode, we'll discuss how to build a healthy staff culture at your church. Well, hey there, and welcome to another episode of the Church Leadership Lab podcast. Our goal with this show is simple, and that is just to have conversations that empower healthy churches. I'm Kendall Connor, and I'm together today with my co-host, Jessica Moore. Hey, Jess, how are you?
Hi, thanks for tuning in, guys. We're so happy you're here with us today.
Yeah, very excited, Jess. I hope that you have been able to have a good start to your new year. How's everything been going for you so far?
So far, so good. I feel like coming back to work, it was really strange having the new year in the middle of the week. Not a huge fan. I feel like for all intents and purposes, January 1st was Monday. That's at least when I started over with my year and all of the new fun habits I'm implementing. So, doing good. What about you?
Love that. No, it's been a great start. Been a great start to the new year. Still getting into some new rhythms and practicing new habits that I'm trying to get going for the new year. So lots of fun stuff there. I'm actually really excited to jump into our conversation today because we have a very special guest with us, and that is Tim Stevens, which is just awesome. I want to tell everybody, all of our listeners today, listen, if you haven't heard of Tim before, if you haven't seen his work, this is a real treat that we get to have him today with us. And let me tell you a little bit about him. Tim spent 20 years at Granger Community Church, helping a church that he says was basically in a cornfield in Indiana grow from 300 to more than 6,000 attendees, which is just amazing. And then from there, he spent the next 6 years consulting with church leaders as vice president at Vanderbloemen. And then in early 2020, Tim joined the team at Willow Creek to help rebuild the team and just envision what it would look like to see Willow once again thrive as a multi-site local church in Chicago. Pretty amazing. These days, Tim, he leads Leading Smart as founder and CEO, and that's where he's able to help churches all across the country to solve problems, to improve their culture and navigate crises and really lead through change. You can already tell just from hearing that bio that today the conversation is going to be awesome. And so I don't want to stall anymore. I don't want to hold it up anymore. I want to jump straight in to our conversation today as we're able to talk about building a healthy staff culture at your church. And so if you would join me in welcoming Tim Stevens. How are you, Tim?
I'm grateful to be here. I was just thinking a bio that long just means I'm really old. So
very experienced is better. Yes.
I'll take that. That sounds good.
Definitely an impressive bio and really just knowing all of the, experience that you have and all of the wisdom that you'll be able to share. We're just thrilled to have you as a guest to talk with us today.
Thank you. We're really glad to be here. It's a chilly January morning, but you know what? What else would I rather be doing?
Yeah, I hear you. We're glad to have you here. And it's something that we kind of always ask all of our guests when they come on. We read the public bio, right? But we always like to ask, what's something that maybe doesn't make that public bio that all of your family and your friends would know about you?
Okay, so if they follow me at all, they know I am obsessed with Notre Dame football.
Love that.
Obsessed meaning last week I went to New Orleans and went to the Sugar Bowl, and tomorrow I'm going to Miami to go to the Orange Bowl. So
you are committed. That's some dedication.
Yeah, obsessed. Yeah. So and it's been 31 years since our team's been any good, so it's kind of fun this year. So that's exciting. And I guess another thing would be pickleball is a fun habit or fun activity I try to play 2 or 3 times a year. 2 or 3 times a week.
And this,
I was going to say
that you bring that up. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Jeff. 2 or 3 times a year doesn't feel like a habit, but we'll give it to you. Or in that case, then I go to the gym. It's a habit.
Based on 2 or 3 times a year. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, yeah, exactly. January 2nd, and then
I don't know what it's like in your cities, but pickleball is just here where I am here in North Carolina. It's just starting to kind of pick up some steam, and so we're starting to see clubs and things pop up. And so maybe I'm yet to jump into any pickleball, but you'll have to maybe I can get back with you, Tim, and get some tips along the way.
We could do a whole session on pickleball tips sometime if you want to do that.
feel
love
like
it.
that just means we need to have you back on the show to just
Sounds
talk about
good.
football, right?
I love
I
it.
love that. Oh, that's awesome. That is those are perfect additions to the public bio for sure. I know that we want to be able to talk about staff culture today, and I know that you have so much to speak into that and so much experience with that. Would you? Well, maybe we'll start with this. Why do you think that staff culture is such an important factor for churches? We've got a lot of leaders, pastors and church leaders. Why is having their staff right an important thing as that maybe they're starting this new year trying to make things better?
Yeah, and I would probably argue in like any organization, any team,
Yes.
staff culture is really important. I read a ton of Patrick Lencioni's stuff, and he kind of focuses. He's a Christian, but he focuses on businesses and organizations, and really kind of beats the drum for healthy teams. And I just think it matters so much more in the church because the mission matters so much more. I mean, what we're doing is so crucial and so important that if we don't have a healthy team, man, our people sniff that out. They can tell. Even if our services are great and worship's great and the preaching's great, they can tell if our team is dysfunctional or unhealthy. and that trickles down. It trickles out into the base of volunteers, into the whole congregation. So, I've had, if I think of like the three things you mentioned that I've done, two of them, going into Granger Community Church and then Vanderbloemen, walking into pretty healthy cultures and then being able to build on that. And every culture ebbs and flows. So sometimes it's like, you start feeling a little bit of slide and then you work on it to get it healthy again. But then walking into Willow after a really difficult season that the church went through and a really hurting staff, and walking into, a very toxic culture where, some people were just not happy to be there, and others were just exhausted. And then there was new people like me walking in and being like, okay, let's go. And it was like really, really difficult environment there for a while. So it's just interesting kind of seeing the different sides of that on the impact of the health of a team on the church overall.
I mean, just on that alone. Oh, sorry, Kendall. I was going to say, just on that alone, first of all, I'm going to geek out on this conversation, so we'll just start there. But I think you mentioned walking into different dynamics. This is not one of our questions that we talked about asking you, but I think it's so important to pause and note, how are you gauging the temperature of your ministry culture? It may be a question actually further down, but and that's not necessarily for you to answer. That's just in thinking about this conversation that we're going to walk through. I think it's really important to read the room, right? So you walked into those organizations and the climate was very different. And so I think it's really noteworthy to pause and say, that's important, right? That's a key piece to this is kind of knowing what you're walking into. But okay, so what would you say? What are kind of the most crucial elements, I think, of a healthy staff culture? And then kind of part two of that, how can leaders kind of foster those? Let's start with that.
I mean, as far as like crucial elements, I think intentionality. Like I'm convinced that culture is either getting better or it's getting worse. Like it's never right. Neutral. And if a leader or leaders aren't intentional about it improving it, it is absolutely not improving. It's getting worse over time. And you may not see it at first, but over time, it's just kind of eroding if you're not intentional. So I think that's the most crucial element, is just leaders or a leader at the top of the organization or towards the top of the organization that is waking up every day thinking about the health of the staff. And it's not their only job, and it doesn't require 40 hours a week, but every day they're thinking about it. And the larger the team, the more kind of time that's required to think about it. And then as far as like, how do you foster that in your teams? You hit it, Jessica, assessment, like just knowing where, and you can get some of that through intuition and through, having some people from the outside come in and just kind of get a sense. But also I'm like a big fan of tools and assessments and surveys, and there's a bunch of good ones out there. And I would say pick one and stick with it. And then every 6 or 12 months, just take the assessment again and just see what it says about the health of your culture. And you're not going to find a perfect tool or assessment out there, but that's okay, because you're just using it really to kind of alert you of potentially weaknesses and to create conversations about where you could get better.
Love that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And something you mentioned, the larger the team you have, the more important it is that you're focusing as a leader on how your culture is. But you would say that this applies. Having a right staff culture is something that's important for small staff, small churches, all the way up to large organizations. Would you say that?
Yeah, and the organization I'm leading now is the smallest one I've ever been in, which is my own, and it's me. I'm the only employee, and I have 3 or 4 part-time folks that are helping me out as well. I have to think about it. I have to think about the culture of my team and what I'm building here. Yes. And I think it's interesting with, if folks are listening that are involved in church plants, or you're involved in a church where the church planters are still kind of there and leading, early on in an organization or when you start something, culture is kind of caught. I mean, it's just kind of like it's in the air you breathe. And you spend a lot of time usually before you start a church writing down all your values and mission and vision. Like you really focus on what's going to be unique about us and what's important. But over time, and I was at a church startup, you get into like year 6 or 8 or 10, and then suddenly you think it's still getting caught, and you're bringing people in that weren't there in the beginning, or they've only been attending the church 3 years, and then you hire them from a volunteer role to a staff role. And then you realize you got to start teaching it. It's not just caught, it's got to be taught. And so then you got to get real intentional about codifying like who we are, what do we value, what's important to us, what's important about the behaviors and how we treat each other. And then use that as a filter as people are coming in, and also a training opportunity.
Man, that's so good. All of that was so good. So you build it, it's innate, it's just a part of your vision and your mission. Not necessarily formalized, it's just, we get it. This is the idea, this is the concept, right? And then people start coming in and they're like, we weren't here, we missed it. Right. We're not part of that inside joke, right?
Right.
And so, being able, and I would imagine, you're the expert here, Tim, but I would imagine that you would want to document some of that in some capacity early on if you're thinking about it. And, but for anyone listening that's like, we're dreaming about the church that God is going to build through us, right? Keep that in mind. Like, what is the vision? And that's just, Kendall and I have talked about, communicating your mission and your passion and your vision statement and how that affects every other aspect of your church or your ministry. That's been an ongoing conversation for us. But I think it's really noteworthy to say, this is our North Star. Everything can point back to that, right? So your culture is going to be not just the way people feel and how we engage around here, right? Relationally, it does reflect like we are an organized culture. We are an efficient culture. Like it affects your operational side of things too. And so having that North Star to point back to, even from the beginning, is so important. And documenting that, I think, is something that you didn't say it. You said you kind of just catch it. People, it's like a verbal thing. It's like a folklore that you've passed along through generations. Yeah. But really documenting it, I think is extremely important to note. Yeah, that's great.
And really for even an older organization, if they haven't done it for a while, it's probably something you should freshen up every 6 or 7 years.
For sure.
And especially if it's, a lot of times you spend a lot of time on either mission statement or vision, or in this case, we're talking about staff values. And there's a lot of energy and excitement around it and a lot of like intentional. And then, 5-6 years later, you're like, what is that? Where is that? Oh, is that on the staff website? Like you don't even like, it's not part of the vernacular anymore. And so you need to freshen that up. So, but I do think like going through a process, and I should probably like differentiate here, because a lot of church leaders, when they think of values, they think of church values, which I think are super important too. Church value might be, we believe everyone should have daily engagement with the Word of God, or we believe life transformation happens best in small groups. So it's a value of the church. Yes. What I'm talking about here is more staff values and like how we treat each other and how we
Right.
behave. We're gonna believe the best in each other. We're gonna commit to telling the truth. Things like that are more about our behavior, our life together as a staff, and doesn't necessarily need to be limited to the staff. I like it when churches use staff values, but they also teach and train those to their high capacity leaders that are leading teams. And it's like we're all part of the staff. Some of us are paid, some of us are not, and we're focusing on this together.
That's a good call out.
That's so good. Tim, I feel like you're speaking directly to me because I serve at my church, and we're a church plant that just hit 10 years. When you were saying that a church, it initially just everyone knows everybody and everyone knows how things are supposed to be. And then, here 10 years later, we're looking and we bring in new people, right? And we just think like, man, they're not going to, how can we expect them to know something that was just, shared folklore, right? Like right. in the very beginning, it's things that we have to, are now having to turn around and figure out how to put those on paper, how to, help new people to understand what makes us tick. So I love that. Quick question that I have for you, just trying to think about, okay, how come the leaders who are listening to this today, they're hearing from you that you do have to be intentional about building a staff culture. It's not going to happen on its own, but they're maybe wondering like, what are some practical steps that they can take to, to be able to invest in this team culture?
I mean, a couple of things I think of. I mentioned earlier, kind of someone who wakes up thinking about it. So like identify on your team a values champion. So it could be the executive pastor. It could be just someone on staff that's just like when you think about like who you want everyone on your staff to be like, you think of that person. Yeah. Someone who really embodies the staff culture. So I had someone on my team at Willow, her name's Emily. Amazing leader, and just someone who exuded our culture. And I hired her, so she'd been there less than I had been there, maybe a year when we kind of jumped into this. But she was one that just woke up every day thinking about how can we make life better for our staff? How can we, be more intentional about how we value each other and how we behave? And so someone like that, a values champion who's going to wake up every day thinking about it. And so she was the one bringing me ideas all the time of like, I think, hey, what if we did this in staff meeting? Hey, I think we're, losing a little ground on this value, whatever it was. It's like someone who's thinking about it. And then something that we did at Willow initially to launch into our discovering our staff values, but we kept it going after that, was we started what we called a culture team. And so that was, Emily was on that, I was on that, but we together, 10 or 15 of us that met and just talked about, initially it was like, what do we value and what do we want? And then it was like, how do we communicate our values? How do we take what we've kind of decided our values to be and how do we like get that into the air we breathe? And then how do we not, what are the events and activities and rhythms and cadences that we can build into our staff so that these things become normal? So they really do become kind of the air you breathe. And so those are a couple like practical things I think you can do, especially on the front end of getting intentional about staff health and staff culture.
I love the idea because I know somewhere there is a lead pastor who's listening to this, right? And they're thinking, okay, I've got to figure this all out. This is going to rest only on me. I love that you gave two examples, not just one, but two, of kind of being able to share some of that responsibility, finding that person who, just radiates that that staff culture that you're trying to build to, and getting them involved on that. And then I love the idea. And you said that you call it a team. What was the name of the team? A culture team?
A culture team. Yeah.
That's so smart. But again, to me, I feel like it puts some lead pastor who's listening to this at ease to just know that it doesn't totally have to weigh on their shoulders.
I think the lead pastor, they're like giving blessing. They're giving their permission. They're communicating, this is really important to me. And that's why I'm asking you to take this on, or that's why I'm asking this team to take it on. I'm working with a church in Vancouver, near Vancouver, Canada. And similar things, small staff, church that's growing, they're having a hard, it's just everyone's busy. And the lead pastor, this is really important to him. But if it's on his plate, it's not going to happen. And so I'm going up there in 2 weeks to lead a staff retreat, and we developed a culture team. We're just going to kind of work through this process together and kind of get them going. So I think you're right. I mean, if this has to sit with one person at the top that's super busy, it may not become as much of a priority as if you empower someone else in the organization to take it.
I love that.
That makes so much sense. You talked about kind of driving the staff values into an organization's DNA. And I love the ideas that you shared about the team and, getting a staff member. But what are some ways that you've seen, maybe some creative ways that leaders and teams have been able to kind of keep those values for a staff culture front and center?
I think it's, I think of the words rhythms and cadences. So however you can build it into the rhythms without, no one has extra, time for extra meetings or whatever. So build it into kind of the natural rhythms. So for an example, once we developed our values at Willow, and I've helped other churches do this as well, then, in our case, we had a weekly staff chapel, we called it. Once a month, we would take about 10 or 15 minutes in that staff chapel to focus on one of the values. And we would internally, we'd call it value of the month. No one else knew that, but it was like the value we were focused on for that month. And we would have someone, and usually not someone at the top, usually someone from throughout the organization and throughout the church who just lives out that value, and just say, hey, would you be willing to share in staff for 5-10 minutes? It can be based in scripture. It could be based in a story. It could be how you've seen someone else live it out. Just talk about that value. And then we'd also say, and give us a way we can wrestle through it. So we sat at round tables. So we just say, say at your tables, talk about this for the next 2 minutes, and just get people wrestling around it as well. So that was one idea. Another thing we did is we used a tool called Leader, which was basically a one-on-one or meeting management tool. And in that, we were able to infuse questions that were specific to the values. So we would ask our leaders, if you lead a team, let's say you're the head of the junior high ministry or whatever, you're leading your team, staff or volunteers, whatever that team is, just one time a month when you're meeting, take 10 minutes and just throw out the value and say, hey guys, how are we doing on this? Is there any way we could do better on this? Have you seen anyone living out this value? Just to keep it kind of front of mind for folks is, I think, is super important. And then just, I think, celebrating, like we would do stupid little kind of, meaningless trophies kind of thing that we'd get out in a staff meeting and say, this is, the person who's living out this value the best, and this silly little cost us 60 cents kind of thing. But everyone would cheer and yell, and, and we'd have sometimes the staff vote on that. Like, who do you think lives out this value the most? And then we'd celebrate them. So anything like that you can do to keep it front of mind.
I love that. Like a culture Dundies, if you will.
Gotta get an office reference in there.
It's good.
That's awesome. Okay. Shifting gears a little bit. You mentioned this at the very beginning. You said, we talked about the folklore, and then it's documented, and then you can start utilizing this as you're filtering through the hiring process. So kind of transitioning into, like, we know how to establish the culture. We talked a little bit about communicating and making sure everybody's on the same page. And so now how do you implement that proactively, right, as you continue to grow? And so you emphasize finding the right people. You don't want to rush it. So what's your advice for church leaders to be able to filter through those cultures as you're hiring new staff members?
Yeah, I heard a friend who's an executive pastor in another church say a long time ago, he said, don't hire people and train them up on your values. He said, hire people who already live out your values.
Ooh.
Which I thought was super helpful. Yeah, and I actually think it's both. I think you hire people that live out your values already, and then you continually train and tell them, here's what it means here in our context. But so what we did is we ended up with 5 staff values, and we developed some like exercises, questions, and things that we would do in the hiring process to help us identify, is that person already living out these values? Now, if it's an internal hire, meaning they're already in the church, they're already volunteering and serving, it's a little bit easier. You're really just kind of assessing what you already know about them, or you're asking people that are closest to them. If they're from, if you're in Chicago and they're in Tulsa, then you're probably having to do a little bit more work to determine whether or not they're already living out these values. And so we would just have different ways in our interviewing process, questions that we would ask, references to get a sense of if they were living out those values. And then we did have developed an onboarding. It's like a day and a half that we would do sometime in their first, like every 6 months or so. We would do it for anyone who'd been hired in the last 6 months. So there could be 2 people in the room, and there could be 10, depending on the season. And just take them through like a very intentional day and a half. A lot of fun, a lot of meals, but then a lot of just creativity around how we're talking about the values.
So, a thought, I don't know if this is something that you implemented, but I know that in the past, if I've looked at any sort of career or job descriptions or anything, some organizations, some companies will have a little blurb about their staff culture. And I don't know if you can answer this question, but generally speaking, would that be helpful? Almost like I guess, just thinking logically about people and jobs, and a lot of times salary is one of the biggest considerations, right? And so if the salary is right and the culture is wrong, they may still apply. But generally speaking, if they kind of know what they're getting themselves into, and you as a church organization have done a good job at making your organizational culture public, I would imagine your staff culture will reflect some of that as well. It will be more hands-on, like more practical, if you will. But do we feel like that would be helpful, is having that information kind of within the job description, even before interview process and any of that?
I do. I totally think so. And if you can take it a step further, and I think you can do this without a bunch of video equipment, you can just do it with an iPhone. Have a link in there that links to someone on your staff, maybe that culture champion, who's just talking about what life is like here at First Community Church, like, what it's like to be on staff at this church. And here's why I've chosen to give my life to this. And here's what I experienced 3 years ago when I came on staff, and why I'm staying, someone that's like just kind of normal on staff that can speak to it as well. That's
a great idea. I love that.
No, this is some great advice. And, Tim, I'm just sitting here wondering, for someone who's trying to figure out at their church how to define what a team staff or a team value or a staff value would be. Can you give any? And I didn't prepare you for this, but I'm thinking that maybe you may know some of these or remember some of these from different places that you've helped. What are some examples of what would be a team value or a staff value?
Okay, give me 1 second.
This is the best. This is best possible way to answer this, I think.
We did these on little cubes.
Love that.
Squishy cubes. So we had our church values on the blue cubes and our staff values on the white cubes. Wow. And these are just something people could, sit on their office or throw at each other if they wanted. But our 5 values, this was at Willow Creek, and we did this work maybe 3 years ago is when we kind of first, 3.5 probably. But believe the best, trust as our default is one of them. Probably my favorite one. And it's probably the one that was the most aspirational when I got there, because there was a lot of just hurt and a lot of like second guessing and not believing the best about each other. And then commit to candor. Kindness is our way is another one. And that was important for us because we were came out of a season where you could say that believing the best got the church into trouble, because when accusations came around a leader, a lot of people said, he didn't do that. Don't believe the accusers, versus like combining that with committing to candor. And like, we actually have to find out the truth in this and do our due diligence.
Sure.
Choose unity. Diversity is our strength is an important one for our team. Set the tone. Joy is our attitude was the 4th one. And the last one, embrace challenge. Grit is our style. Was our last value. And when you're doing values, I do think 5 is probably about as many as people can remember. It doesn't mean they're the only 5 things you value.
Yes.
And that's why I think every 5, 6, 7 years, not every 2 or 3 years, but every 6 or 7 years or so, it's good to refresh them, because there may be one of those values you can it's like, we got that one, we kind of put it over here, and there's another value we want to raise up that's a little bit more aspirational for the next season.
So I'm going to go ahead and just implement those as our family rules.
Perfect.
Have you email me, and we're going to make little squishy cubes, and my kids will take them with them everywhere. I love that so much. That's fantastic.
Great.
I just can't wait to steal the idea of having them on the little cubes like that. That's so good.
I'm sure it was not original to us. I don't remember.
That's phenomenal. I love that. Okay, so now going back to leaders, Kendall, I know you mentioned, like, thank God this isn't all on the senior pastor. The capacity is not always there. However, they are responsible to act these out, right? There is a level of responsibility with leadership to implement these values or your culture, right? So how can I'm going to change this. I'm going to word this question a little bit differently. What is the level of accountability that you can implement to ensure that your leadership is living out these culture points? Because, as you mentioned, the intentions are good. It's sometimes just life is hard, and people go through hard seasons where one or multiple of those values will be difficult to constantly uphold. So I guess that's two questions. So what is the expectation set for accountability, right? So how are we checking in with our leadership to make sure that this is being embodied at the highest level? And then two, if it's not, how do you handle those conversations? What's a good way to make sure that we're getting people back on track?
Yeah. And I think the accountability is for whatever position you're in. It's important that, and in the best cultures that are like the most dialed in and like it's actually in the air you breathe, it's self-checked. It's like kind of, toxic culture self-ejects because the people around are not going to stand for it because it's so anti to what what the rest of your staff is. That being said, I do think also like performance reviews, I love to see performance reviews built around values, at least like 50% of the performance reviews built around how is that person living out those values and what's one thing they can do. I always loved, like with my team, talking to them about what's the value that they're living out the best and the most, and they're just crushing. What's the value that they could take some ground in the next year? And like, a couple tangibles under that.
Love that.
And I loved it when my leader did that for me as well. But I think that's all the way through the organization. So I think in ideal situation, your lead pastor, senior pastor is not isolated. They're on a lead team, and that lead team together is holding each other accountable to the values and raising a hand, calling a foul when they see. And we all have tough days and challenging days and days when we wish we had done better. It's just really cool when you have a team that will give you grace for that and also call you on it.
Yeah.
And that's so important. I know, I'm thinking about the listeners that we have that are hearing this today. Some may not all be in a high level leadership position at their church, right? They may be a volunteer. They may be serving on a staff and they're not in a lead pastor position. If someone who isn't in charge is hearing this today and wants to have just a thriving staff culture at their church, how can someone who isn't in charge influence and make things better in their culture within their organization? Yeah,
I would say to let's say a department leader heads up kids ministry or student ministry or whatever. Yes. I would say, first of all, ask, does something already exist churchwide? Is there already a list of staff values, even if it's dormant and hasn't been, have to blow the dust off of it. Like if you've got something, don't create something if something exists.
Yes.
Use that. And even if it's like not being practiced, not being intentional across the organization, but take whatever exists and make it intentional. I remember when I went into Willow and we had 7 campuses and probably, across there, maybe 25 different teams. I'm just going to guess. And a lot of hurt. But there was these couple bright spots. I remember a guy named Neil led our IT department, and that team that was so healthy. And it's like, how did you do that in the midst of all of this chaos around you? And I think for him in that season, he just said, I can't do anything about all this up here, but I can focus on my team and help them become healthy. And so I think we have that ability, whatever level you're at, even if you're not in a leadership position, you can affect positively the 2 or 3 people around you. But in a leadership position of a department, if that list doesn't exist, then create one. And just like until something exists, like let's just, hey, this is what's going to be true of our team. And what you'll find out is the word will get out. And other teams will be like, what are you doing? Like something's changed. Like I remember Neil's team, an IT team, you think of computer nerds, right? They would, because of the values they were living out, they would buy pizza and go to a campus that's, 30 minutes away and say, hey, we're just going to bring pizza for your staff and just sit around and ask how we can serve you better. It's like, who does that, right? But it was part of the values of their team that they just decided they were going to live out, even though they couldn't affect everything else.
I love that it doesn't have to be, something that's all. Let me back up. The first thing, I love that you said, make sure if you are serving and you're not in charge, you're not the lead pastor, or to check and see what already exists, right? Because you don't want to go about try to build something that is already there, or like you said, even if you have to dust it off, it would be better to try to fulfill those and support your church and your organization in that way. But then also, part of it is getting creative, right? Like there's nowhere on paper that says to take pizza as you described, right? Like it's, being able to get creative with it, I feel like is something that's important too, kind of going out of that box a little bit and just saying, okay, how can we actually live out these values rather than, just checking a box?
Yep. And so often, like on a staff position, it's easy to point fingers and talk about how the organization's not doing this, or our leadership's not helping us with this, and if you just turn that around and say, what do we have no control over? What do we have partial control over? What do we have full control over? And what we have full control over is how we're acting, how I'm living out the values. I have full control over that. Partial control, what's my team doing about this? No control, I may not have any control over how the organization is living this out. That's okay. Let's focus on what we have full and partial control over.
Okay, preach. That's
good.
life. That's being a good human being right there. A healthy human being. Anyway, that's awesome. That's really great.
Well, something, Tim, and this has been an amazing conversation. The advice that you've been able to pour in today has been incredible. It's kind of something that we always try to come back to on this podcast is talking about healthy churches, inspiring healthy churches, and equipping them. I'd love to just hear your perspective on this. In your opinion, what would you say is one essential component of a healthy church?
So, probably maybe to beat a drum a little bit more, this culture thing. So I was talking to someone the other day, and I said, it's like, what was that? And it's like, oh, wait. Ronald Reagan in the 80s, I don't care what your politics are, but his philosophy was trickle down economics. And I said, okay, it's like that, but it's not political. It's like trickle down culture-nomics. I don't know what it is, but but like the level at which a leadership team of an organization or department is healthy, and then you just kind of you have intentionality below that, and it just trickles down. Yeah. And then the things that you're trying to accomplish as a church, make disciples. You're trying to introduce people to Jesus. Baptism. We're trying to launch a campus. We're trying to engage people in worship, get people more engaged in their scripture. Those kinds of things. If you're doing that from a position of health as a team, man, I think that's where the magic happens. And sometimes we're struggling because we're not getting the results we want on the mission, and we don't have a healthy team. Like we're not leading from a place of health. So that's a little bit through a lens of culture, but that's kind of, I feel pretty strongly about that.
Yeah, I want to just touch on something that we really haven't talked about. We've talked over and around it, not intentionally, it just hasn't, but kind of pulling in a spiritual component to this. Churches are at risk constantly of failure because obviously there's an enemy trying to break down the church. And so I think that this is such a proactive way to put on the armor of God as an organization. Do those values, do that staff culture and these staff values help you be on your guard, right? As
Yes.
as a ministry, as a church, to be able to walk in your overall mission. I think that tying those two pieces together is important because, like we've said, so many of these tools that you're talking about, Tim, can be implemented in even just organizations and businesses. But it's important to kind of note and pause and reflect on the fact that there's a different component with churches because there's a different level of responsibility attached to the mission. So I think that that's, having that in mind and adding the spiritual component. How are you going to prayer about these things? How are you seeking God in these different types of culture points and these values as you're developing them?
That's a great point. I'm convinced one of the things that we did early on at Willow that just gave us the strength and gave us the integrity, I guess, to make some of the changes we made and to see some of the changes happen quickly was bringing things back to a place of prayer. So it was interesting. One thing, a philosophy, and I don't know where it came from, but a philosophy that was prevalent when we got there was you come prayed up. So we're not gonna pay people staff time to pray. You come prayed up. So, and I don't know, motive or heart behind that. I'm not going to question that at all. But I will say, like when we just I remember the first few staff meetings, like, okay, we're going to take the next 20 minutes and just get around your tables and pray. And here's some bullets on, here's some things to focus on. Feel like, wait, like we can do this? Like what? For people that have been around for a long time, because that was a prevalent. Yeah. And so prayer isn't one of the staff values, but prayer actually made it possible for us to figure out who we wanted to be as Christ followers in the context of a team.
Wow.
And really, arguably, you could say all of those staff values that I read come from the fruits of the Spirit, come from just living a Christ-honoring, loving life that's grounded in a relationship with Jesus. And so yeah, Jessica, totally agree with you.
I love that. And what a great way to end with that. I know something that we want to try to do before we get off today is being able to go through kind of a rapid fire round of some questions before we have to wrap things up today. Tim, would you be up for some quick questions to come your way?
Let's do it.
Oh, I love that. So first one coming at you is on the subject of culture. Is there a book that you would recommend on the subject that you could recommend to church leaders? So
I have a good friend, Jenny Catron. Many of your listeners probably know her, who is coming out with a book next month in February. It may even be the end, but sometime the next 3 or 4 weeks, called Culture Matters. Yes. So I'm guessing it's available on Amazon or for sure on her site. But she's brilliant. She's taught me a ton related to culture. And so that's a brand new book coming out. I've read the draft. I think it's great. So pick it up.
Awesome.
That's a great recommendation.
Yeah. I wish I would have brought a pen to this. I had so many things I didn't get to write down. Okay. I'll take number 2, Kendall.
Awesome.
What is the last thing, Tim, that you have listened to on Spotify or Apple Music or wherever you listen to music? Be honest.
So there's a band, a person, a DJ named Fred Again. That's the name of his group, Fred Again. And he's a DJ, but he just makes some fantastic techno music. Some of it's super slow and some of it's upbeat. And
I've got to check this out.
Check it out. You can check it on YouTube. If you watch some of his displays, it's so great. So
that's fun.
That's awesome. I've got to pull that up after this. What would you say these days is your favorite piece of technology or software?
Well, okay. So I'm on Zoom a ton or Teams or whatever, Google Meet video conferences. So Fathom, Fathom, is a note-taking app that connects to any of those. So on any of those meetings, whether I initiated or someone else did, it pops up. It takes notes that are 98% dialed in, they're perfect, which enables me not to have to sit here at my keyboard. I can actually tune in look at people and then I have all of those notes, and it has the option to send the notes to the other people in the meeting right afterwards. But it's like, I think it's $8, maybe $10 a month. It's the best $8 or $10. Saves me so much time.
Come on, you're going to save that in notebooks, right?
Yeah.
I was going to say that would have been really nice to know at the beginning of the call, Tim. I just said I needed notes on everything. So
that's true.
Okay. So what is a quote or some advice that has stuck with you over the years? Could be about anything, not just culture.
All right, I'm going to give you two. One's about culture, and I mentioned it earlier, and it's one of our values at Will is believe the best. Like, I just really think that's very unnatural. We always want people to believe the best about us, but we often, in our minds at least, assume the worst about others. So just trying to remind ourselves in any situation, there's probably something here I don't know about why this person is behaving this way. Another one, so I have adult kids, so this is unrelated to culture or whatever, but my kids are 24 to 31, and 2 of them married, 2 of them not. But someone was asking the other day about what's something you've learned with raising or leading, parenting adult kids. And I just said, love them really well, ask a lot of questions, and love the people they love. And that, leading almost every conversation with questions, not statements. And then loving them well and loving the people they love.
That's is fantastic. So I love that. And, my kids are young at this stage. My oldest is in the 4th grade, if that can kind of give you an idea. So
you can still make statements when they're in 4th grade.
I'm thinking, I still think that those things apply, even though my kids are not adults at this point.
Yeah.
I think it's really 100%. Solid advice. Love that.
Yeah, that's
Tim,
great.
As we wrap up, what's one thing that you'd like to communicate to our audience of church leaders today?
I would just say, if this is like any typical group, probably there's a percentage of you where everything's up and to the right and you're excited because everything's growing. But there's probably a super large percentage where it's like either static or declining or frustrating or not working. And I would say, and that was, when we went to Willow, that was like everything was either on fire or in steep decline.
Sure.
And I would just say, keep doing the next right thing. Just keep doing the next right thing. And there'll be seasons. And for us at Willow, it's probably 2 years where we saw zero response. In fact, we just, kept getting worse. So, but just keep doing the next, if it's the right thing and you figure that out through your time with Jesus and your time with other people that are wise and counsel, good counselors around you. But if you're doing the right things, your faithfulness will pay off. And the payoff doesn't mean, you're going to explode and triple in growth next year, but payoff could be health. It could you could bring a sense of health. I was talking to a pastor this morning who went into a church several years ago, but he said it was 25 years in decline. He got there 7 years ago. And he said just in the last 3 years, as it actually, they've started to see some stability and a little bit of growth. So just keep doing the next right thing.
Love that.
That is solid advice. Tim, this has been so valuable. Where can people follow you, and where can they hear more about you and hear more about what the services that you're currently offering?
Yeah, so leadingsmart.com, LEADING smart.com. I put out an article once every other week or so that's just kind of trying to resource leaders on usually something I've learned recently on figuring out how to lead better. I've got a team that can come along and help churches with culture. We do a lot of work with succession with longtime pastors, and then we do a lot of work just with organizational and structural things that can impede the health of a team if it's just not set up right. So a lot of fun stuff there. And there's a button on the website that says "Let's talk." So if you're like, I don't know if you can be helpful or whatever, you can click that. It'll pop up on my calendar, and we'll have a short conversation and see where things go.
That's amazing. Yeah. And I would encourage our listeners to go and check that out and to be able to hear more from you. And I think that's awesome. Tim, thank you so much for joining us today, for being on here with us.
Yeah, this was fun.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure. And I'm like Jess, I've got to go back and listen to this again and take more notes because this has just been so good. So yeah, thank you so much again for being on here with us, Jess. Thank you for being on here hosting with me today.
Sure,
and I just want to encourage all of our listeners, if you're listening to this today and it's been valuable to you, all that we would ask from you is that you help us to get the word out to others. If you've got a friend that's serving in ministry, or maybe you want to share this with someone on your team or your staff at your church, sharing this helps us to continue to do what we love doing, and that's building healthy churches and equipping you for the ministry that you're doing. And so please share this with someone. If you're listening on any of the podcast platforms, be sure to leave a review for us on there, subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube with us today, any of those places, follow us so that we can continue to bring you these conversations that are going to equip you and help you to walk out this thing as you're serving in your churches. So thank you so much for being on here with us today. Thank you for listening in, and we will see you all next time on Church Leadership Lab.
This episode of the Church Leadership Lab podcast is brought to you by Ministry Brands, the largest provider of church technology software. Over 90,000 churches rely on Ministry Brands for their single platform solution that brings together all the digital tools a church needs. From online giving to websites to church management software and more, Ministry Brands is leading the way in simple to use, innovative solutions, all with the goal of empowering healthy churches. To learn more, visit ministrybrands.com.